All Indiana Politics is your premier source for Indiana politics, focusing on issues that matter to you.
I still want us to be the best in the Midwest.
We can't afford another lockdown.
Give the citizens of this country the relief they need.
Education in the state of Indiana remains priority number one.
In-depth, nonpartisan coverage.
We don't know exactly where the economy will be in January.
People are worried with good reason.
Exclusive interviews with Indiana's political leaders.
We have the resources here in the state of Indiana to care for those who are in need.
Expert analysis on critical legislation.
We need to reform those laws.
This recovery is going to take some time.
We've got to anticipate that there'll be a budget shortfall.
From Wish TV, this is All Indiana Politics Podcast on the All Indiana Podcast Network.
Good morning and welcome to All Indiana Politics. I'm Garrett Bergquist in for Phil Sanchez. It's halftime in the Indiana General Assembly. So far, this session is focused on property taxes, Medicaid, and how to spend your tax dollars for the next 2 years. Governor Mike Braun is now threatening to veto the very bill that contains his property tax plan. That's because the Senate significantly scaled it back. When I asked him about it in a news conference, he said he's not above calling a special session either. The Senate's version expands deductions for low-income seniors and adds a tax credit for low-income first-time home buyers. It does not include an option for all homeowners to reset their tax rates to 2021 levels. The plan is now in the House. Legislative leaders in both chambers say they doubt they'll need a special session. Here's what some of them had to say about the plan itself. On Senate Bill 1, if the House ends up coming back with something a little closer to the governor's original proposal, is the Senate willing to consider that, or are you, at this point, are you still pretty firm on what you came up with?
Look, we don't work in a vacuum here. Of course, we'll consider whatever they come up with. We understand the governor has a strong opinion on this. We're going to continue to work with the governor and his team. The House is going to have a strong opinion on it and try and come up with a policy that they think is best. Inevitably, I'm sure it will be slightly different in some way from ours, and that's what conference committee is about. So we'll hash out those differences at that time. But we're not telling you that we're immovable from the draft that we just passed.
On Senate Bill 1, where is your caucus right now on where the bill is currently versus where the governor wanted it, and what would you rather see in it?
Well, and with all due respect, we're just doing House bills, so I haven't really had a chance to talk to the caucus yet. We haven't all weighed in on Senate Bill 1, but I've said from the get-go that I think that we can come to a place where you are giving some property tax relief without doing total damage to local governments and schools, and that's what we'll strive to do in the second half.
And more action in the Senate. Members of that chamber approved a measure that could kick more than 250,000 people off of the Healthy Indiana plan. It's a response to rapid growth in the Medicaid rolls. The measure caps enrollment in the Healthy Indiana plan at 500,000. There are currently more than 700,000 people using the plan, so it could kick more than 200,000 people off the plan. It imposes a work requirement for able-bodied adults without children. You would have to work or volunteer at least 20 hours per week. That's if you did not meet one of several exceptions. And it prohibits any advertising for Medicaid services.
Medicaid's grown by $5 billion over the last 4 years. The rate of growth is higher than our entire revenue, our rate of revenue increase. So we're spending more on Medicaid alone than the percentage of our total revenue.
My question is, where's the data that shows that 300,000 people do not need Medicaid services? Wouldn't it be more assuring to all of us to have a report that showed the 300,000 people, maybe 100,000 of them might not need services, maybe 100 of them were not insured before and were not informed before, and they got insured after the expansion?
Meanwhile, the House has signed off on a plan for spending your tax dollars over the next 2 years. The House's budget mainly follows Governor Mike Braun's requests. Schools get a 2% boost on average to their basic tuition support, and textbooks are now rolled into the basic funding package rather than a separate line item. It fully funds Medicaid, but does not provide any funding to pare down the wait list for Medicaid waivers. The income tax rate would decline slightly.
I was asked a question. In one word, describe this budget. And I could have, of course, given an answer. I couldn't do it in one word, but I did use a word, and I still hold to that right now. It's called opportunity. It's an opportunity for parents to make the choice for the best place for their children to attend school. It's the opportunity for Hoosiers to live in a state with an extremely bright future.
I do feel compelled to highlight and reiterate the K-12 funding, fully funding at a true 2% versus an average of 2%, a missed opportunity in education. Many schools don't even get a 2% increase, not even inflationary rate when it comes to this budget. Unfortunately, vouchers, caps off. What are you going to do with vouchers? Everybody gets a voucher. The elite gets a voucher.
Now, several high-profile bills did not advance. A bill to dissolve Indianapolis public schools died without ever getting a hearing. So did a bill to require county sheriffs to take part in the federal 287G jail immigration enforcement program. The author of bill to crack down on homeless camps did not call it for a vote in the House on Thursday, so it expired. And the Senate never voted on a bill to shorten the early voting period to 14 days. Keep in mind, though, lawmakers can bring back dead bills as amendments to other bills later in session. At the federal level, a bill to criminalize publishing deepfake porn has already cleared one half of Congress. I caught up with Senator Todd Young about the bill. The Take It Down Act covers imagery created by any computer-generated or technological means, such as artificial intelligence. It criminalizes publishing deepfake porn without a subject's consent, and it requires social media companies to have procedures in place to take down any reported violations.
We'll rely on federal attorneys, U.S. attorneys that we have covering every bit of real estate across the country. This now gives them a jurisdictional hook to prosecute these sorts of crimes.
Young is a co-sponsor on the act. It passed the Senate unanimously earlier this month. The Senate passed a similar bill last year, but it never got a hearing in the House. Tech industry advocates say the bill doesn't have enough penalties for false reporting.
For the Take It Down Act, there's essentially no penalty at all for misusing the takedown requests. It's almost an open gate. It's the bill, in a sense, greenlights takedown abuse. So that's a very serious problem that would need to get resolved.
Mullen says we already have laws against distributing non-consensual nude images, as well as extortion and harassment. He says the bill could turn into a censorship regime.
Even if it was a conversation they're not a part of, they could demand that that conversation be stopped, censored, or taken down. And then the burden would be on the host of that conversation to deal with it.
Young says social media companies have not done enough on their own to deal with the problem.
You know, as any young lady or parent on the receiving end of these sorts of horrible acts will tell you, those laws clearly aren't working. We need some additional actions to make sure that when people are engaging in speech, there are certain types of speech they know that should be prohibited and not allowed in a civilized democracy like the United States.
Coming up, the governor has signed an order that abortion reports be made public. Hear from one woman about why this puts her safety at risk. Welcome back. An Indy area mother is asking state leaders to rethink moves to make abortion records public. This after her unborn baby was given a fatal diagnosis. Our Kyla Russell speaks with her.
Fell apart because this is not a decision that any of us wanted to make. This is not something that anybody wants to have happen to them.
Just over 23 weeks ago, Hamilton County mom Amber Martin shakily moved her hand to reveal what so many families pray for. These 2 red lines, a positive pregnancy test. Baby Arlo would be Amber's 4th boy.
Crazy because the day that we found out we were pregnant, we were actually scheduled to go to a fertility clinic, was that day. So I called him and I was like, I have a positive pregnancy test.
But hope soon turned to hardship.
You know, we came in here in this office for trivial things like just having the ultrasound. It would have been a normal 20-week ultrasound, and it's not trivial.
Moments later, a crushing diagnosis.
I knew that I wasn't going to be coming home. with this little boy.
At 20 weeks, the baby had no brain activity and would not survive in utero, birth, or in life. Amber was given few choices. She could either wait to deliver the baby naturally, knowing he would suffocate during labor or almost immediately after, or she could have an early induced delivery, the technical definition of abortion, according to the World Health Organization. If she waited too long to decide, according to Indiana law, she would have to go out of state for help.
Basically looked at me and said, we need to get you with medical providers that can help you right now.
With her own life at risk and baby Arlo's, she made the hard choice. Amber said she was immediately inundated with over a dozen pages of paperwork asking for extensive information, including her address, medical history, occupation, race, and religion. All info to be included on what's called a terminated pregnancy report, filled out by OBGYNs.
But the gist of it is that you're being questioned and then you're being warned that if you're picking this and you're picking these procedures, that at some point in time they can come back to you and you can be charged with a felony or potentially murdering your child.
But this operation was deemed medically necessary for Amber. The doctors told her Arlo would not feel anything from the procedure. She says having it gave her the chance to honor her son's short life.
This right here is an executive order signed by Governor Mike Braun in January, calling on the Department of Health to follow Attorney General Todd Rokita's request that terminated pregnancy reports become public record.
Rokita says the reports aren't medical, and making them public allows him to make sure providers are following Indiana law. The public reports would be redacted to protect patient identities.
Pregnancy reports were always for public health research and data. They were never meant to what our Attorney General Todd Rokita says, to be turned over to the public citizen, to police abortion providers.
Leanne Holka, co-founder of the bipartisan political action committee called Our Choice, says there used to be thousands of reports made every year before abortion was banned in the state. Now there's only about 40 abortions allowed in the state every couple of months.
These private medical records of patients, if you're turning them over now, it's just for witch hunt purposes.
Amber believes it would be enough information to find her, but despite the risk, she's not afraid to say having an abortion saved her life and meant Arlo wouldn't suffer.
But I remember coming back from that procedure and just wanting to hold him, not being able to.
I reached out to the governor's office for comment, but got no response. Amber says she plans to advocate for better education on abortion and what might lead a woman to that choice. Reporting here in Indianapolis, I'm Kyla Russell for Wish TV, wishtv.com, or follow us on Facebook for updates.
Coming up, Indiana's best political team on how the first half of session affects you. And welcome back to All Indiana Politics. With us now are two members of Indiana's best political team, Republican Mario Massillamany and Democrat Lara Beck. Thank you both for coming in. Lots to unpack from this first half of session. Mario, let's begin with you. Braun is pushing very, very hard for those property tax cuts. The Senate sent him a significantly scaled back plan. So far, is this a loss for Braun?
I don't think it's a loss for Braun. Also, remember, now it's going to go to the House. So there's a good chance that there's going to be a lot more tweaking within the House. And so I don't think that it's a loss for Braun. They're stopping some of the huge increases in property taxes over the years. That's one of the plans or cuts and changes within the Senate program. So I think that it's still a win for Hoosiers, but I don't think that this plan is done. I don't think this bill is done. And I think there's still going to be some more tweaking within the House before we have a final version in front of the governor.
And Lara, Braun has threatened to veto this bill and call a special session if needed. Would that accomplish anything?
Well, I think anytime you have to do a special session after a long session, it is not a good look for you because it also is incredibly expensive for taxpayers as well. One of the main issues with this property tax and with his cuts that are going to happen to local government is this is essentially a shell game. I mean, you're going to take money away from taxpayers, right, for people who own property, but then somehow we all have to find a way to pay for local government services, and this isn't just something that impacts Democratic cities. A lot of times there are things that happen in the legislature that are directed toward Democrat-held cities. This is going to impact every city, every school district in the state of Indiana. And I think for the legislators, they are going back home to their districts and they are talking to police officers. They are talking to teachers. They are talking to the person who works at the public library, people, mayors, people who are in their districts, and they know how this is going to impact them. And the fact that they have stood up to Governor Braun and made changes in this, I think it sets up for an intra-party fight down the road.
Let's turn to the Medicaid bill. Lara, we heard the numbers from Senator Mishler earlier. Given the rapid rise in enrollment that we have seen on the state's Medicaid rolls, is there really any way that we can address this that doesn't involve cutting some people out of the program?
Well, I think it's a challenge for everyone. I mean, one of the things that you do is that you expand access and you cut costs. That's how you really make this happen. But at the end of the day, these Medicaid cuts are really going to hurt the people who voted for President Trump and who voted for Mike Braun. I mean, I brought my little cheat sheet here, but if you look at counties in Indiana where 25% of the people are on Medicaid, we're talking about Grant, Vigo, Scott, Crawford, Fayette. Those are counties that voted red last time. If you're looking at counties where you've got 40% of kids on CHIP, we're looking at Orange, Owen, Park, Sullivan. Again, these are red counties. So ultimately, this is going to hurt their voters, and they're going to be the ones to pay the price for it.
Mario, to that point, Democrats have proposed, among other things, scaling back the school voucher program to free up money for Medicaid. Do Republicans need to put some of their ideas on hold while we deal with the Medicaid issue?
I don't think so, because there's another bill in the House right now that is trying to cut the costs that Hoosiers have when they go to the hospitals. There's a bill that's focused on trying to make sure that medical costs are brought down. We have some of the highest medical costs in the Midwest, if not in the country. And so this is a beast that needs to be tackled, because if we can lower medical costs in general, that will help with Medicaid. And so there is a bill currently in place that is trying to lower some of the costs that hospitals and providers will charge to insurance companies. And I think that might help also.
Let's take a look at the budget for a minute. Pretty much what the governor asked for. Mario, for the average Hoosier, what do you think is the most important item in this budget?
I think one of the most important items is still dealing with the property tax caps, right? People are very concerned about the fact that they're looking at their tax bill every year, and there's some significant increases. The Senate bill limits that. It restricts how much the increases are going to be. Now, the question is, what more are they going to do? To Lara's point, is it a shell game? Somehow we're going to have to come up with these numbers for the schools, for the local government. And so, that needs to be taken into consideration. And the General Assembly does a good job of incremental change. And I think that people need to understand that, they're tackling property tax caps right now, but let's see what they get done this session. They can always make some changes next session.
Lara, Democrats tried to add a master amendment to the budget that was ultimately not successful. What's the biggest missed opportunity here?
Well, I think one of the missed opportunities that we see every year is the lack of investment in early childhood education. We are probably one of the only states in the country that does not have universal pre-K. And I think as we look at test scores and as we look at education and as we look at how our kids are doing, especially in a post-COVID world, universal pre-K is one of the best ways to put kids on a path for success. And I just feel like every year this is just something we miss every single time. And I'd love for us to continue to keep the fight up for it.
I've got about a minute left, so I want to wrap up by asking both of you, what is one bill that's been flying under the radar that's still moving that you think we need to pay attention to? Lara, you go first.
I think looking at the education funding and charter schools and public schools and how those funds could potentially be shared and how that impact is, as well as the voucher funding, I think that's something that we should definitely be paying close attention to this session.
Mario, what do you think? What's one thing that's been under the radar?
Well, under the radar, it's been talked about a little bit, but making school board races partisan. I think that that's something that's going to be interesting. I think that's going to impact a lot of these school board races when somebody can declare that they're Republican or Democrat in Marion County. I think it's going to be impactful because, Democrats win a lot of these races. In other counties, such as Hamilton County and some of these other counties surrounding central Indiana, I think the fact that you're going to be able to label yourself as a Republican.
We'll have to leave it there.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Plenty more to talk about, though. Thank you both. We will be right back. And thank you for joining us for All Indiana Politics. We'll be back here next Sunday morning at 9:30. And be sure to check out the All Indiana Politics podcast online at wishtv.com. Have a great rest of your weekend.
From Wish TV, this is All Indiana Politics Podcast on the All Indiana Podcast Network. Watch All Indiana Politics live Sunday mornings at 9:30 on Wish TV and at wishtv.com. Subscribe to this podcast and listen weekly here on the All Indiana Podcast Network. And be sure to discover even more great podcasts at allindianapodcastnetwork.com.